Hello and welcome. This is not therapy hour in association with effective artistry. We're here every Monday at 1 p.m. Central Time. This is an open conversation with Caitlin Miller and Brandon Tessers. It's a chance for you to ask some questions about anything to do with mental health, therapy, coaching, neurodiversity. My name is Marie. I'm a coach with Effective Artistry, which is a neurodiversity affirming therapy practice based in Northbrook, Illinois. Hi, Brandon. Hi, Caitlin. Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Good to be here. If you're joining us in the chat, feel free to leave your questions and comments, and I will read them out. But as the title suggests, this is not therapy. It's more like open office hours. So if you've got questions, we'll answer them if we can. Otherwise, we'll probably ramble on about whatever takes our fancy, whatever is on our minds this week, and hopefully come up with something useful. So, how are you both doing?
I'm liking the phrase takes our fancy. I feel like it acknowledges the hedonic pleasure.
Yes.
It's a funny one because in like American English we'd say strikes our fancy, not takes our fancy.
Yeah, because we're so aggressive.
I guess.
Yeah. It implies, I guess it implies that our interest is captured by something. And you say takes our fancy.
Yeah, it's almost like we're imperialists, right? It's like,
Are you
no.
exempting the UK from this?
Yeah, right.
Not at all. I think the UK was the OG, right? Well, not technically.
Not the OG, but probably the biggest there's ever been.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess you could.
Tiny country.
It's just different methodologies. Also, I'm curious because in the States, open office hours is a concept that is very specific to like higher education, university, like professors. Does it have the same?
Yeah, that's kind of what I have in mind because this is not your consulting hour.
Yeah.
It's more like if you've got a question, drop by.
Which I've said a similar thing before, and I think it is an apt way to describe this. And for anybody who doesn't know, open office hours is like professors, people who teach classes are typically also required to have a certain number of hours per week where they're in their office and the door is open and anyone can stop by to talk to them about anything. So it's that kind of similar thing. And yes, often that is utilized by students who are dropping by to talk about something relevant to one of the classes or whatever. But it is also often utilized by students who want to talk about something completely unrelated or people who are not students or,
I think that's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. Anyway, to answer your question, I'm very stressed and irritable.
No.
So who wants to be yelled at? No, I'm kidding.
I'll do it.
No, I'm very stressed.
I can increase my distress tolerance.
I feel better already, even just in the few minutes that we've been going, because this is enjoyable for me and takes my mind off of the things which are stressful to me.
Yeah.
But I have been very stressed. Yeah. But that's not me putting that on the table to discuss, just answering your question of where I'm at. Life is also good. That matters. I feel like I made you both hesitant, perhaps.
No, I want to say something like, how can we support you in that? But I don't know if that would escalate into like personal.
Well, I appreciate the question, and there's nothing that either of you, certainly nothing that
I can ask the sun to come out for tomorrow. And the song too. Also.
You could do that. Actually, sunnier days are easier for me.
With lower barometric pressure.
Yeah. That matters.
Yeah.
One of those variables that people never ever pay attention to.
Yeah.
But it matters.
I've been dropping it in some conversations ever since you brought it up, like, I don't know, a year ago?
That's one of my like standard go-tos when people are like, no, I know why X is happening. And I'll be like, oh yes, you've considered all the variables? Yes, it's because have you considered the barometric pressure?
And guess what they say? No.
And honestly, the other one that I use a lot, because again, it is always true that people don't consider it, but this one's even better. I don't use it as much because it's more crass, but it's better because it is very clear and incontrovertible that this impacts your mood, your memory, your cognition, everything. And it is, how badly do you need to defecate?
Oh, yeah.
That people will talk about being irritable from being hungry.
Yeah.
Or from other organic changes, notably in our culture, people will talk about the menstrual cycle and how it relates to mood a lot.
Which is a prison. Oh, sorry.
I
don't know
have
if I should
never
use
heard
that word.
anyone talk about how their mood or their ability to focus or concentrate or whatever is impacted by gastrointestinal conditions.
I would like that for you to I would like for that to be your major contribution to philosophy, Brandon, throughout your and you're going to be the defecation.
You're like, client was resistant because blank, blank, blank. And I say, wait a second, did you check if they needed to go poop?
Exactly.
You didn't check. No, the funny thing is, and I use that one again because it's more crass, but also because people do sometimes take in the urge to urinate as a factor. Like, I'm sorry, it's really hard for me to focus right now because I really need to pee.
Yeah.
Like, we will acknowledge that impacts even the way that you think and focus, executive function, blah, 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 blah. But the other one, no one ever talks about, at least in our cultures. Maybe in other cultures, people talk about it more.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, the number of things that people will offer a psychological explanation for and explore no other factors.
Yeah. I'm not tempted to do that at all, ever.
I didn't want to do any chores yesterday around the house because my feet were cold. But I couldn't figure out why I was so cranky and so resistant to doing anything until I sat for a little while and realized, oh, it's just that my feet are cold and I don't want to put them on the ground because the ground is cold. I'm just going to sit here instead.
And another funny thing about that too is that if we practice checking in with our bodies more, that also technically gets us out of cognition. So even if we're answering a bullshit,
I try not to swear on the stream, but it's not like we're not allowed to or whatever.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a rule, but now I lost it. Oh, that it allows us to check in with our bodies, which will get us out of cognition, right? Which will technically probably help us if we identify as neurodivergent.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, this is one of the lesser discussed dangers of the medical model, deficit model of mental health in the more broad, like cultural way, because the conversations tend to focus on higher impact things like, institutionalization and et cetera, et cetera. But a way in which it is detrimental to pretty much everybody is that it's not even disputed in our culture that psychology explains pretty much all mood and behavior. So you ask a person, hey, why did you do X or why did you not do Y or whatever? And they will very frequently say, because I'm angry, because I'm depressed, because yes, there a request for no swearing or inappropriate language, please. Gotcha.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. There's when it comes to the term lazy, there are other people talking about this, notably a book by a writer, Dr. Devin Price, called "There's No Such Thing." No, laziness does not exist.
Yeah.
Which is great. And the main point of saying that is not to say that we could never use the word lazy to accurately describe or inaccurately. Like, we can use language and we can mostly agree on, well, that is lazy and that's not lazy.
Yeah.
The problem with the term isn't that it's not an accurate label, it's that it's not causative.
Yeah.
And that it blocks any incentive to explore anything else.
Yeah.
Why didn't I do this? Because I was feeling lazy. Oh, okay. But if that's the problem, if the reason that something's going wrong for you is that you're lazy or feeling lazy or whatever, what are you supposed to do about that?
Yeah. I feel like people mostly say I need to care more or something, and then it becomes the cost value stuff. I can't read it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I got very distracted. I am assuming it's in jest, but
Yeah.
question to the panel: do you think the yassification of modern culture vis-a-vis the mainstream success of Gucci Gang by Lil Pump negatively affected the economy of Scandinavia? In case that's a serious question, I'm going to have to defer to other people who know more about the subject because I have no idea or opinion. And whether it's serious or not, I appreciate the comment.
That is hilarious.
Anyway, yeah, it's always, nothing has one factor. So my pithy little way of talking about that is you can describe anything in many different ways, many of which can be accurate. And the accuracy of any given way does not decrease the accuracy of any other way. Am I angry because you did this unfair thing? Yes. Am I angry because I haven't eaten today? Yes. They can both be true. So, and the fact that one is true doesn't make the other one any less true. The fact that my hunger is impacting how angry I am doesn't mean that the unfair thing which was done doesn't make me angry. So to me, the question is always utility, not accuracy. You know, if everyone's just focused on accuracy, they're arguing over words for the most part. If we're focused on utility, we're actually coming up with ideas to try, seeing what works. Frankly, I'll take an inaccurate but useful answer over a accurate but unhelpful answer.
I feel like the idea that both of
Sorry, another joking. Go ahead.
No, I kind of want to know.
People who study psychology, why do they get sad or unhappy? Can't they just read their notes? It feels like a Jack Handy from SNL or something. I don't know if that, or like a Mitch Hedberg joke. Sorry,
That's hilarious. I lost what I was saying.
I'm
That was
sorry.
just very entertaining. No, I'm happy to hear the comments.
You know, funny thing, psychology is a very young field. People don't tend to really think of it that way.
Yeah.
But all of these explanations for things, even a lot of the terminology and whatever, are very new. And the ones which are popular have been disseminated very quickly. And there's nothing, I mean, for the most part, there's reasons that the things which are popular get spread so quickly. It doesn't mean that they're always helpful or always accurate.
Yeah.
But there's some value to them. But it is funny to me that people in our culture, we generally tend to think as though psychology is like a given. You know, like it's just.
I feel like it's sort of a new religion.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are elements of that for sure.
Because what would you track historically as predating psychology as sort of like, this is the book of answers, I guess. I feel like I'm baiting you, but I'm truly wondering what your thoughts are, Brendan.
Well, the immediate predecessor would be phrenology, which is the study of the shape of people's heads and that how that relates to various personality characteristics. But yes, it's definitely in the like philosophy and ethics and theology kind of category. It is, I'll say, it attempts to serve a similar function as those things. Right? It attempts to help us understand why people do what they do, and if we want things to go differently, if we want to feel differently or get different responses from other people, what do we do? Right? So similar questions, and then a lot of different ways of trying to answer those questions. For sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's much more in common. That's what I say a lot, that to me therapy is applied philosophy, not applied psychology. Because psychology is helpful for what it is helpful for. It is not and never has been intended to help an individual person or explain an individual circumstance. That's not what it is, and it's not what it was ever trying to be. It involves statistical research, like large scale research, and by the nature of what statistics are, none of that answers any questions about why a particular instance of a thing went the way that it did.
I do feel like the people doing the research, though, like to think that they're finding answers for individual people.
I mean, that's probably true, but I don't know any or many of the people doing the research, and whether they actually think that or not, they certainly are incentivized to put it out there as though that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Because of money, funding.
Yeah, I mean, finances, and I mean, it mostly comes down to finances.
Mm-hmm.
There's something called the replication crisis. We're really just going anywhere. Uh, that people outside of academia tend to not be very aware of, which the point of scientific research, like especially when it comes to experiment research, but even, you know, um, I'm blanking on the terms, Marie, maybe you can help me, but even research that is about evaluating statistics that exist rather than
literature review.
Yeah, lit review and
No, I'm not an AI bot. Thank you for your question.
a valid.
I will blink 4 times if I need help. I look forward to finding out what help you're going to offer.
Anyway, the point of scientific research is that it is meant to be replicable.
Yeah.
That one study can never be taken as valid until other people in other circumstances replicate the study and get the same results, because you can't control for all the variables. So unless you can replicate it, you can't say that it wasn't due to some other external variable.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's doing that. Nobody.
With psychology, right?
Psychology is probably the worst, but it's not just psychology. It's most scientific study.
Yeah.
The replication crisis is a term that refers to people are not incentivized to try to replicate and either validate or invalidate other people's prior research. They're incentivized to do new research that they can come to new conclusions. They need to publish papers. They need to, quite literally, most research is done in university settings of the kind that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people doing that research have requirements in their contract that they publish 2 papers every 5 years and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't replicate things. So one study happens, the idea gets out there, nobody ever double checks to see if that holds up under other circumstances. And psychology is probably the worst. That's not me saying that. That's an opinion that's out there, but psychology as a field, social sciences more broadly, but psychology specifically.
Wow.
So you said psychology is useful for what it's useful for. So what do you think psychology is useful for?
Large scale.
All right. So looking like kind of at system level rather than.
Right. If you're going to try and design curriculum for a public school system, psychology is very useful. If you're going to design the way that a grocery store is laid out in order to optimize purchases of certain kinds of
milk
things.
In the back.
That's like,
I don't buy milk.
Yeah, it's for large scale. It's for organizational structure and systemic things is what it's intended for. But there are obvious reasons why individuals would be very incentivized to pay attention to these things and say, oh, this is why I'm doing this. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I want to clarify, I'm not trying to discredit all this research or say that it is useless. It's not. Most people do best, broadly speaking, when they get about 8 hours of sleep a night. Does that mean that if a person who is struggling is only getting 7 hours of sleep a night, that getting 8 will solve their problems? No. But since we know that it is common, the most common way, then it's an idea that's worth trying.
Yeah.
So it is very useful even for the individuals if you approach it as what happens most of the time or what works for most people as ideas to try. The problem is if you try it and it doesn't work, then you say, okay, that was a good idea to try. It didn't work for me. I got to look for something else. Great. But more likely people will say, I tried to do that thing and it didn't work for me. What's wrong with me? That's the thing which needs to be done in order for a person to feel the way I want to feel or act the way I want to act.
Yeah.
And either I can't get myself to do it or I am doing it and it's still not working. And then we go into psychology. I should be happy. Why am I not happy?
So is that where you would say a lot of sticky answers come from?
Yes. I would say that, but there's a lot of places for sure. Sticky answers it's my little made up term for what we've been describing. When someone's asking a question and they come up with an answer which is theoretically helpful but not practically helpful, then they get stuck.
And practically is like practical to the individual, right?
Yeah, it means can it be put into practice, and when it is, does it work? So things that are theoretically helpful. Oh, if only I just got more sleep, then I wouldn't be so tired. That's theoretically true. Now, if we test that and it doesn't work, it's actually pretty easy for most people to kind of say, well, that doesn't work for me. I'm moving on and looking for something else. But if you can't test it, if you're like, I wasn't able to go to sleep early last night, then you don't dismiss the theory because it's still theoretically useful. Why would you try and come up with another idea? You already have one.
Yeah.
So then very quickly it becomes, how do I get myself to go to bed early? When the original problem isn't going to bed early, the original problem is feeling tired, and there are other things that you could theoretically try.
Yeah, and I've had clients like ignore the sticky answer, find a practical solution, have the practical solution help, and in this case, like maybe their energy improves, and then actually eventually they are able to address the sticky answer in a way that actually works. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's like you can go in like a circle and get back to the sticky answer, and sometimes it can actually help eventually once you resolve other things. Not all the time, but it's interesting how that'll happen.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the time those questions or those ideas, they're theoretically useful. And the problem that prevents them from being useful in practice is that you aren't able to do them. But then when you get circumstances changed and then you're able to do them, then they're useful in the way you thought they would be. But yeah, a lot of times, yeah.
And we have a comment here on sleep, actually. I struggle with the question of how to get myself to go to bed early every day.
Good question. Very quickly, the question before that I think is a joke, but just in case it's not, no, it will not teach you that. Hypnotherapy is a specific type of therapy, and there are many different methods of doing it. As far as I know, they mostly don't use pocket watches. It's not something you would learn majoring in psychology.
I wish I could read these comments because I would be laughing.
I know they're fun. Yes, I struggle with the question of how to get myself to go to bed early every day.
That sounds like a sticky answer.
Well, most likely it is, but we want to address both things. First is there are likely other things that you could be doing that would help with whatever the problem you're experiencing is besides going to bed early, and it would be worth exploring those other things to find something that's easier for you to do than this. And we could even make suggestions of what things to explore. And it is also valid to explore, why can't I do this thing, or why am I struggling to do this thing that would theoretically be helpful for me, and we can talk about that too.
Yeah.
This is a very common one. I'm very cognizant of I'm very aware of the comment earlier about Marie not speaking, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm leaving more.
You worry that I'm not getting an opportunity to speak. No, that's yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Caitlin.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm good. Yeah, I guess my question there to that commenter about getting to bed early every day would be, why do you feel you have to go to bed early every day? Is there a reason? Do you have to be up early every morning? Here we go. My current answer on why it's so hard is I don't want to go to bed, because then the next thing will be waking up, and I certainly don't want to wake up. Okay,
yeah, that can be interpreted in a few different ways. But if you're saying that in the kind of like, I wish I didn't exist kind of way, then obviously this is more an issue of, call it depression or despair or hopelessness, than it is about going to bed early. It could also be interpreted to be a reference to, when I wake up in the morning, then everything I have to do the stressful and unfun things and whatever.
So there might be a bigger question there about stress and how to manage it, so that getting to sleep is easier, waking up is less of a drag.
Yeah,
And also your life being something that you're enjoying more.
Those
Yeah,
are-
waking up is hard and life is hard, and I don't want to get out of bed and do all the hard things.
yes.
It's relatable.
This, yeah, for sure. This right here was a great example of people prioritizing psychological explanations for things.
Yeah.
Both in the question,
Mhm.
both you in the comment talking about the very first thing you say about the difficulty with getting to bed early is a psychological explanation. And then suggestions from the two of you,
Mhm.
which are great suggestions, are also psychological in nature. Explore how to make your life something that you're more excited about, and etc. Or at least it could be interpreted that way.
Mhm.
Uh,
Maybe they should check if they've defecated before going.
I know you're saying that as a joke, and it's a lot
No,
harder
I'm
to go
trying
to
to
sleep
tie
when you
it
need to
in.
use the bathroom.
Yeah, I'm trying to tie it in, Brandon.
I like that you yes-anded that. There was an and instead of a but.
The yes and is so impressive to me. It's hard for me to. Oh wait, no, it's hard. Oh,
I don't know what you're.
I don't.
Look, going to
Rules,
sleep,
Brandon.
sleeping, like communication to me, sleeping is one of those things that is ridiculously complex
Mhm.
and so strange,
Yeah.
but that we experience all the time from before we can even remember every single day.
Mhm.
And so we don't think about it in that way very much.
Mhm.
But and this is, you'd have to talk to a neuroscientist to get more specific details, but the neurological and biological processes involved in going from wakefulness to sleep is like a lot. It's a very strange thing. It's not something that just happens easily, and the only reason that we think that it does is because eventually you can't control it. You get tired enough and it will happen whether you want it to or not.
Mhm.
So because it will sooner or later happen more or less automatically, we think of it as something that's supposed to happen automatically.
Mhm.
Problem is then that a lot of us structure our lives in such a way that we can't do it that way. Like if your life was structured in such a way that you could just stay up until you fell asleep easily and then wake up when you wake up easily, then that would be the answer. Do it that way.
Mhm.
But your life obviously isn't structured in that way. Mine is not. Most people's, for various reasons, we have to wake up earlier than we otherwise would.
Yeah.
I'd say maybe most. I think it's most.
I think it's most.
So when you're going to shift it, and that is a useful thing to do, don't expect it to go as easily and automatically as it would when you do it the other way. There's no reason to think that that's how it would be. And especially important, I think, is that people will think, oh, if I get on this new sleeping schedule, it'll be hard to do at first, but then eventually it'll just become my new automatic habit. And that doesn't really tend to be the case with this. Habit is a psychological thing.
Are you saying that we sort of have ingrained circadian rhythms depending on the person, and that changing when we sleep is not something that changes the ingrained kind of bodily preference for the specific circadian rhythm?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the mechanism behind it, and I don't think anybody really does, but there's observable patterns, right?
Yeah.
That like people tend to sleep in different ways on different schedules, and there's lots of theories about why that is.
Yeah, I did a sleep study once, which was, oh my gosh, psychologically. Anyway, but the sleep specialist asked me about like bedtime patterns, and it was interesting her suggestions depending upon that were like not what you would just find in a BuzzFeed article. Does BuzzFeed still exist? Maybe.
I think so. I don't know.
Yeah.
What kind of suggestions?
Like for example, I was having, I think it was issues falling asleep, and she said, why don't you just start with falling asleep at your normal bedtime and forcing yourself to wake up earlier, so then you're tired during the day, and do that for a week or something like that, and then eventually you might start going to bed earlier and then being able to wake up at the same time. It was like a...
That is a much better suggestion than people saying go to bed earlier first.
Because she was like, your body is used to going to bed at 1 a.m., so why don't we start with that?
Now, having said that, most of the time that people are saying they need to go to bed earlier have already been doing that for a long time, meaning they're already going to bed late and forcing themselves to wake up at the time.
I'm wondering if I'm recalling her suggestion incorrectly. I don't know if
I would imagine. I mean, that is helpful.
I think it also might have been get 8 hours from like 1 to 9 and then start to push it earlier over time.
I mean, those are the two options, right? Either you focus on trying to sleep earlier, go to bed earlier first, or you focus on waking up earlier first. And it does seem to tend to be that if you really need a shift, just making yourself, because you cannot make yourself fall asleep, but you can make yourself wake up.
Yeah.
So it's more likely to work if you make yourself wake up earlier.
Yeah. It just makes it a hard, at least like 3 days, sometimes weeks, sometimes years.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even necessarily always work. In fact, sometimes it makes it worse. A lot of the, especially neurodivergent people, a lot of the time when we're struggling with going to bed early, the more tired we become, the less likely we are to go to bed earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, theories on that and whatever, but we could make.
Is that the, like, what is it called, wired but tired sort of feeling?
Yeah, sure.
We have another comment here. I'm very skilled at staying awake even when I'm very tired, and I know I have to wake up early. Yeah, same.
Now, see, here's the question I would start with. What are you doing during the time that you think would be better spent sleeping? And
that is a great question.
Part of the reason that we ignore that is because we focus on the psychology.
Yeah.
And we think of it as, for example, the internet's favorite revenge bedtime procrastination of, oh, I didn't get to have enough fun today, so now I'm doing my fun thing. Or, oh, I didn't have enough control over my own life today, so I'm taking control of when I go to sleep. Which that second one, although very commonly discussed, is absurd on the face of it, because if it's just about controlling yourself to go to sleep earlier would be fine too. Anyway. Being tired, yes. I feel like being tired means I have fewer spell slots to convince myself to go to bed. Spell slots is a reference to Dungeons and Dragons. Like,
I need to just do it. It has to happen.
But yes, resources. You have fewer resources. Now, start with the assumption that there is value to what you're doing during that time, other than just avoiding going to sleep.
Yeah.
Like 99 times out of 100, when people are struggling with something they're trying to work on changing over a long period of time, failing to change it over and over, 99 times out of 100, they're explaining what they're doing as a failure.
Yeah,
they're focused on what they're not doing.
I have someone who talks about that and says that it's their favorite time of day because they do all the things they love to do that they feel like they don't have time to do when they're either working or like winding down or commuting or whatever.
And I love that. That's usually the case, that people, if you ask them, will usually say some version of, I'm just doing the stuff that I like to do, zoning out or whatever. People usually will start by saying like, oh, I'm just wasting time scrolling on my phone. Like they'll say it in some negative way. But if you do get them around to saying what is happening, let's say some version of that. Something which is physically not very taxing,
yeah,
but cognitively and or emotionally satisfying and enjoyable. Usually something that people can do in isolation, by themselves.
Yeah.
So then the next question is this. Not everybody loves the same stuff. And saying, I do this thing because I enjoy doing it is a valid explanation. It's also a psychological one. I do it because I enjoy it. The next question will be, well, why do you enjoy that thing? Not everybody enjoys the same things. Why do some of us enjoy reading on our phones at night, and some of us enjoy playing video games, and some enjoy staying up and talking to their spouse in bed, for an hour, and et cetera, et cetera. And try to stay away, in answering that question, try to stay away from a psychological explanation, meaning, oh, I enjoy this because I used to do it when I was a kid, or oh, I enjoy doing this because it reminds me of my grandfather, or try and look at the actual activity itself.
Yeah, the last comment in when everyone else is asleep is the one time when no one has any expectations of me.
Yes. Great answer. One I agree with, psychological in nature, but one that I very much agree with, in particular for those of us who, the term social sensitivity that we've used in the past, where part of our working memory is going toward what do other people think? How would they, that even
Hard, Brandon. Not all. I'm joking about myself, not the person who's commenting. This is
I mean, there's, I want to talk about that, but that's a whole field. Because it could be argued that it's always all, but anyway. And even if other people aren't in the room with me, right? Like, for example, I have 3 young children, and when I am at home and everybody is awake, it doesn't matter if I'm in the other room. Hell, it doesn't matter if I am using the bathroom. Part of me is thinking I need to get back out and be playing with the kids or helping out with this or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, when everybody else is asleep, no part of me is thinking I need to be doing X, Y, or Z for the benefit of these other people, other than I need to be quiet, which is fine. So yeah, it does free up space in your working memory.
Yeah.
Very common for people to engage in their more creative pursuits at night when everybody's asleep. There's a reason for stereotypes of artists who are up all night working when everyone else is asleep and then sleeping until the afternoon when everyone else is working. There's also both research and theory about why some of us would be more likely to follow that pattern and why all of us collectively, as time moves forward, are moving more and more to that pattern.
Oh, the delayed circadian rhythm? I guess it wouldn't be called delayed if it's...
Yeah, circadian rhythm is...
Here, let me try again. Going to bed later.
Yes.
That is observable.
Yes. Honestly, again, as with most of this stuff, I am almost embarrassed about going in a similar direction a lot of the time. But as with most of this stuff, most of what people think is like natural to humans in our culture is actually what was done most commonly, or at least what was most commonly discussed as the way things are done in the 1950s.
Oh, we're going to do a boomer?
No, we're not going to do a whole boomer thing.
I'm a boomer in disguise.
Look, it's not just about a generational thing. That's also when the television was invented.
Yeah.
And so the very first times that people got to visually see into other people's homes, and especially early on, a lot of that was like domestic, what is it? What are the normal other person's life like?
Oh, yeah.
And so it locked in a lot of ideas for people in our kind of consciousness of, oh, this is how people live. This is how people, and in the show, they're also happy and they love each other and they all sit down to dinner at the same time every night. And so we just make these correlations and whatever. Anyway, go further back than that, and that's not how people sleep. Most, as far as I'm aware, again, I'm aware of some research and whatever, but this is not my specialty. That mostly the pattern of sleep for the history of humanity has been 2 to 3 like big, long 3 or 4 hour chunks with big gaps in between. In a lot of cultures, even still today, you can see siestas is kind of the most common term we use for that in the United States, which makes a lot of sense. Why wouldn't humans be most restful in the middle of the day when everything is sweltering hot, when that's where you live?
It's practical.
Right.
Wait, is that a psychological?
No, practical is. But right there, right away, off the bat, you can see, oh, I guess this idea that we sleep for 8 hours at night and then we're awake all day long really is kind of more specific to northern or southern climates. But as soon as the further you get from the equator, the greater the variation in the length of the day and the amount of sunlight you get. And so wouldn't it also make sense that our sleeping patterns actually change quite a bit over the course of the year? Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And according to the research that I'm aware of, people most commonly used to, yes, they would go to sleep around the time that the sun went down, which is very early. Most of us don't go, even those of us who go to bed early don't go to bed that early.
Right now, what is it, like 7?
Yeah, but in the middle of winter here,
In the best place on Earth, North Earth.
at parts of the winter, it'll be 4:45. You know.
Yeah.
So people go to bed, and what happened was, yes, they went to bed that early, and then 4 hours later woke up and were awake and active for 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the night and went back to sleep again. So all these ideas that there's a particular way that humans are supposed to sleep or whatever, like, that's just not how it is. Which is an example of why it is useful to look at the research, because yes, most people do best given 4 hours of sleep a night, given the context and et cetera, et cetera. That's not the same thing as people are supposed to get 8 hours of sleep a night. Anyway, so yes, you have your different ways, and some of that, at least there is some evidence to suggest that some of that is biologically inherent to a person. But certainly some of it is context dependent too.
Yeah.
That if I were to move to a culture where people do siestas, I probably would start napping more.
I remember when I was in Italy and they were having their version of a siesta. I forgot the Italian word for it. It was so nice because everything was quiet and chill. I was like, wow. Honestly, I wouldn't sleep during it, but I was like, this is just lovely that the world, we don't have to be so stimulated for the whole day.
Aside from in like weather and sunlight, those kinds of environmental conditions, yes, there are other inherent reasons why it makes sense to put out a lot of energy and be very active for a few hours and then rest for a few hours and be very active for a few hours. The idea of wake up, start being very active, be active for 12 hours, relax for 2, and then go to sleep is new and absurd. And it's not that it can't be done. It's just, why would anyone think that's how we're designed to work? That our biology is designed to work that way? It's never been.
And my immediate thing is some joke about capitalism. So.
I mean, there's.
Or like modern work schedules, the 9 to 5 sort of.
Yeah. There's truth to that.
I would love to not have to get up and start work early, but I feel like changing society is a lot harder than changing my sleep schedule. There you go.
Absolutely. It is. And there are other things that are even easier than changing your sleep schedule. So again, I would incentivize you to look into those other things. One in particular that I find interesting is this term for it is from Andrew Huberman, who has a podcast, Human Lab, I think it's called, something like that.
Huberman Lab, I think.
Is it Huberman Lab?
I think he uses his name or something.
Non-sleep deep rest is kind of his big thing that he researched and named and talks about a lot. That when we're looking at like brain waves for a person, that there are shifts that can happen in those waves that mirror or approximate shifts in those waves that happen when a person is asleep without the person actually going to sleep. And as he would point to, that you'll see all throughout different cultures and different times and whatever, a lot of these things, meditation, quiet retreat and study, prayer, honestly, I think reading is my best way to that there will be times where I'm reading a book and even though I'm tired, I read until 5 a.m. and the next day still feel pretty okay.
And just to clarify that, rest in this context means like using your brain in a different way than you have for the rest of the day, because I don't think some people would consider reading rest. Right?
Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. Yes, what non-sleep deep rest is referring to the idea that there is restfulness that isn't just about sleep. And he has a lot of specific stuff too. And again, even in the trying to go to bed earlier example, some very practical tips that you may have heard of before and maybe not. But these are some of like the strongest variables that people have discovered that we don't pay much attention to, and they're mostly environmental. Turn down the temperature in your house by 2, 3, 4 degrees about 45 minutes before you want to be going to sleep. Turn it back up about 45 minutes before you want to be waking up. Not eating, this is one of the strongest correlations.
Mm-hmm.
Not eating about 3 hours for about 3 hours before you want to fall asleep.
Mm-hmm.
I do tend to, when people are trying to make the specific change that you're trying to make of sleep earlier, I do tend to find more success with people shifting their eating habits first, sleep habits later. Because again, remind me, let me know if this reminds you of any neurodivergent experiences of, I'm never really very hungry in the morning, or all the way up to like, yeah, the idea of eating in the morning, like I'm almost like queasy or nauseous. The idea of eating in the morning sucks. So I don't really eat in the morning. And then I get going to work and then I'm just like busy and I forget to eat lunch. And by the time the first time I eat in the day is sometime at like 1 to 4 p.m. And even that's not a lot. Then I get home from work at like 6 o'clock or whatever. And then from like 6 p.m. to like midnight, I'm just kind of eating constantly. I might do a meal there, but mostly I'm just grazing. And the later that it gets, the more I'm shifted into eating things that are full of carbs and sugar. Now, one of the problems with how people think about sleep is they think of it as the end of the day and that waking up is the beginning of the day. So we don't consider any continuity through the sleeping portion of the day. It's like days are separate in our mind. So what happened the night before doesn't impact what's happening the next morning. But if you wanted to do this experiment for yourself, because everyone's different, but a thing that happens, if you wanted to do this experiment for yourself, try the opposite. Try waking up in the morning, eating a crap ton of carbs and sugar for like 3 hours, and then don't eat anything else for about 10 to 12 hours, see what happens.
Have you ever had someone do that? And if so, what happened? Not that this is like what's
so
the word?
The thing that I would expect to be happening in this particular cycle is blood sugar crash.
Oh, so they crash in the middle of the day?
Right. If you do it that way, you crash in the middle of the day. If you do the pattern that we were talking about just now, your blood sugar crash happens in the middle of the night while you're asleep. So you don't notice it. And then you wake up experiencing all the symptoms of a blood sugar crash. I'm foggy. It's hard to think or get going. Even though I slept like a good amount of time, I still feel so tired and it's hard to get my brain online. And I'm almost queasy or nauseous. The idea of eating sounds terrible to me right now. Those are all things that happen in blood sugar crash. Again, I'm not saying that that's as simple as like 1-to-1, right? Like there's complications here. But we're so quick to just write off, I'm groggy in the morning because that's how I am.
Yeah.
And then there'll be a morning where I wake up very alert. So I know it's possible. But then instead of saying, what's going on the day where I wake up alert and how do I replicate that? We tend to focus on, man, why am I groggy? I know I can wake up alert. What's wrong with me? So we're not looking at the thing that works. We're trying to figure out why when it's not working, which is way less efficient. And then when we do try and figure that out, what does everybody think of first? Quantity of sleep.
Yeah.
How much sleep did you get? If you ask somebody how they sleep, they will only really answer. First of all, people will just say good or bad for the most part.
And then Brandon will say, what do you mean?
I do. And usually people are only evaluating one or two things or both. The quantity, like how much time do I spend asleep, or what we call sleep onset. From when I start trying to fall asleep, how long does it take me to fall asleep? So I've had people say, I am a great sleeper. I've always been a great sleeper. When what they mean is as soon as they try to go to sleep, they fall asleep within 5 to 10 minutes, but are sleeping like 4 hours a night and are exhausted. And they'll still say they're a great sleeper. Just this last week, I was talking with a client and asked how they were sleeping. They said, really good, because they had struggled with something in a particular day. And we've been talking about their sleep. And I said, well, how have you been sleeping? And I said, I slept really good the night before. And so, of course, immediately they say, well, first of all, that's one night. That's not how that works. Second of all, I'm guessing that when you say good, you mean like 7 hours. And this person is in an age group that 7 hours is most likely not sufficient for. And we have evidence to suggest that is the case in this case. course, this struggling this day is an example of it. But yeah, that's why I don't let people say good or bad, because I have no idea what they mean by that. It's not that I'm saying you're wrong and that really that's bad, but other things to pay attention to: sleep quality. This is like a golden age of humanity to have in-home stuff to track your own quality of sleep. You can get an app for free on your phone without any peripheral device.
Yeah.
If you have a smartwatch or whatever, like there are other things that can give you more data, but a phone by itself can do it. And people who are struggling with being exhausted and trying to go to bed early, for the most part, don't do that. It's free. It takes 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and I also think the good and bad stuff doesn't have much utility, right?
Yeah. It's like saying lazy. It just gets in the way. So we say, oh, I get it. You slept good. Because when you say you slept good, I interpret that through my lens of what does it mean to sleep good, and assume that's what you mean, even if you and I mean very different things. Because track your sleep quality. And there are so many things you can play around with. And if you're getting that data, then it's much easier to make changes to play around, like lowering the temperature and see how it impacts your sleep quality. And not eating 3 hours before bed and see how it impacts your sleep quality. Changing the sheets and the pillows and the blankets that you use to the extent that you're able to. Most people, I think, this certainly wasn't always the case for me, so I'm aware that it's not true for everyone, but for the most part, people have more than one set of sheets or blankets, or the ability to add a second blanket or whatever. Play around with it. Like the things that are out there and about, just like neck positioning and the height of the pillow.
Well, and there are other ways to also kind of prime your body to cool down as you're going into the process of falling asleep, like drinking hot tea or taking a shower or taking a bath, things that cause like a surge and then you come down from it.
Yep. As well as tea specifically.
With no caffeine.
Actually.
Oh, whoa! Are you about to blow my mind?
I love my bedtime cup of tea.
Yeah.
It's a fairly commonly reported experience, especially with people who are identified as having ADHD, that drinking caffeine or eating sugar makes them more tired and that they get better afterwards. Now, I think that's indicative of something else.
What do you think it's indicative of, Brendan?
That doesn't matter. That's just my personal theory. It's a thing that people report, and it doesn't matter why. Why?
We have a comment. Please tell me I can have caffeine at night. And a comment. Hi Fritz. Sometimes tracking sleep quality puts me into a competitive state of mind, but others have more REM sleep. Yeah.
Well, here's something funny.
That is hilarious.
It's a very common thing though for people. I don't want to track it. Same with people say I don't want to put something in my calendar because then I get anxious about will I do it, and if I was supposed to start at 7 and now it's 7:02, I'm like, well, I missed it. Yeah, we get this idea about that you should do it a certain. We know there are different phases of sleep because there are observable differences. Mostly notably that the brain waves change between the different phases of sleep. Go and ask any scientist what happens in each different phase specifically. Not as in like, what do we observe happening, but as in, why do we have that? What's important about that phase of sleep? What is the benefit? We don't know. We have no idea what would happen if a person got less REM sleep or more REM sleep as compared to some other person.
I thought they said something like
there are
deep
theories.
Sleep is the most effective form of sleep.
That's so it used to be, and not even that long ago, 10, 15 years ago, it used to be that REM sleep was the most important.
Is REM the deepest one, or?
Deep sleep, so light sleep and deep sleep are separate from the phases of sleep.
Oh, okay.
But REM is not. REM sleep is not deep sleep. So much like the food pyramid and whatever, like these things change over time. Does that harm sleep quality? Because I know it helps me get to sleep.
Does caffeine harm sleep?
Does it definitely harm sleep quality? No. Does it harm your sleep quality? Why am I recommending to people to track their sleep quality so that you can find out? How am I supposed to? And
That makes a lot of sense.
I very much love having Baston cider here. I'm not trying to give you grief or anything.
Oh, I love
Yeah,
Baston.
thank you so much.
I want to
Great
like.
questions.
I would love to meet Baston cider someday.
But this is such a common pattern for us collectively.
Yeah.
Of here's this problem. I need an answer to this question. Let me go ask an expert about it. Is our first thought.
Yeah.
Get a book about it. Read an article about it.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, let me try it and see how it goes for me.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, look. Here's what I'll
I
say.
think we might have like 3 minutes. I don't know if you have something at 2.
Yeah.
I don't know if I do.
Maybe 1 minute.
I can run a little long.
52 seconds.
Here's what would be useful to say. It's kind of an answer to your question about my theory, but it's useful more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the point of the non-sleep deep rest and all these other different things is that self-evidently there are different kinds of energy, different kinds of activity, different kinds of rest.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that you do that after you do them, you feel physically drained but mentally alert and awake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So trying to categorize that is a fool's errand. Literally, some of the most brilliant people in the last several hundred years of our species have literally gone mad by the definition of their times trying to do that. Don't worry about getting it right, but worry about your own experience. And a very helpful, I think, commonly helpful way of talking about what's happening at night is that you are physically tired, but cognitively have a bunch of energy.
Exactly. Like I'm like, oh, this is when I should write poetry.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do we focus on activities that are mostly not very taxing physically, but are very, yes, enjoyable, but if you look at it, also taxing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even video games, right, that people think of as vegging out. No, there's so much complex information gathering and problem solving going on moment to moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like reading is an again, we think of it as normal now. It used to be pretty much considered magic because it is very strange to turn scribbles on a page into information in your head. Just because it's easy doesn't mean it's not complicated. So a very common thing for people is that they get to the end of their day, they have a bunch of cognitive energy and no physical energy. And when that's the case, then I would explore how do you expend some of that cognitive energy earlier in the day. I find myself crashing after a few hours of playing Baldur's Gate 3 with a friend. Yup. Best way for me to fall asleep, read a book. I'll be wide awake, and then I read a book, and 15 minutes later I fall asleep.
Yeah, all the coordinating and social interaction just wears me out. Yeah, there's a lot going on when you're playing games with a friend.
Yes, there absolutely is. And
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 I know that tone of voice.
And that's a very deficit model way of looking at it. Once again, you're looking at the value of it as how difficult is it for you to do, not how enjoyable is it to you. So we go back to, why do you enjoy the things that you enjoy? One of my favorite questions. Why do humans have the capacity to feel pain? Pain is not a sense that exists in the environment. It's literally a signal we create in our own bodies in response to something that happens. Why do we have that? And everyone will say, because it's a signal that whatever's happening, you need to address it or stop it or whatever. Yeah. And everyone will also acknowledge that we're wrong about that all the time, that sometimes things hurt, but they're actually beneficial. And so you override that. You get the vaccine, you get you test your blood pressure, you work out, you do physical therapy, right?
Yeah.
Then the next question, which to me is so obvious, but seems like every time I ask it, people have never considered it before. Why do people have the capacity to feel enjoyment or pleasure? It's the exact same thing. It's a signal we create in response to something that happens in the environment. What's the benefit of that? And the obvious answer is it's the opposite of pain. That's the signal that lets us know that what's happening is good for us. It is helpful and beneficial to us. And just like pain, we're wrong all the time. Things feel enjoyable that actually cause us harm. But for some reason, there's a lot of obvious reasons we can point out.
Yeah.
But for some reason, people don't let the fact that some things which hurt are beneficial to you override the idea that most of the time when something hurts, you should stop doing it.
Yeah.
But we do say, well, sometimes things feel enjoyable or pleasurable that are bad for you, somehow connect to it is bad to enjoy anything that you enjoy is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just draining because you're doing something difficult. The difficulty of doing the social coordination, whatever, would impact the efficiency, right? Like how quickly it drains you.
Mm-hmm.
But why would anyone do anything which is very draining that they don't have to do? There's a value to it as well. You're looking at the cost. What's the value?
Mm-hmm.
And don't allow yourself to give like a negative value, meaning it allows me to avoid something else I'm trying to avoid.
Mm.
That's a terrible reason. I'm not saying that it's never an accurate way to describe a thing, but it's pretty much never a useful way to describe something, because there are infinite things you could do to avoid something else.
Mm-hmm.
Why that one? There's something about it that is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason you're doing that one and not any of the other infinite things you could do. Yeah, Karlach's pretty cool. I haven't played enough Baldur's Gate 3 yet. It's a whole thing. It's difficult for me to find time, but I already know that's going to be the romance option. Karlach seems awesome. You guys know Karlach, right? Like,
No, not a clue.
The barbarian who was forced to, barbarian is the class, the Dungeons and Dragons class, tiefling forced to work in Avernus on the first level of hell, has an infernal engine for a heart. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Wow. I would love to hear more. I also want to hear you talk about if free will exists or not sometimes.
Yeah, some other time. Anyway, on sleep, energy and rest, right? Different activities take different kind of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Different activities are restful in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I find it particularly helpful to break it down, not just rest, but there's rest and then recovery. Because rest to me is the like lack of using a system. I am right now resting my like gross motor system. I'm not using it. I'm not recovering it. I'm not doing anything in this moment which helps it to repair from damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
While I rest, it is able to repair from damage at a higher rate, but the rest isn't what's enabling that.
Mm-hmm.
The nutrition and the whatever. Same deal for, I find it useful to look at physical, cognitive, and social emotional as the three different kind of categories. That there are times where I'm like lonely and want to hang out with people, but also exhausted physically and cognitively. And those are the times where I'm like, I know I'll have fun if I go, but oh my gosh, I don't want to go do this thing that I'm supposed to do with my friends tonight.
Yeah.
But we all have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
There are times where I am physically exhausted, but cognitively alert. I get in bed and try to get to sleep, but I just can't shut my brain off.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I do something cognitively engaging, like reading a book or listening or watching a show or playing or look, then all of a sudden my thoughts stop because I just need to put that energy somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then there are times where it's like, I'm antsy. To me, that's, I have physical energy. I want to do something, but I don't have the cognitive or emotional energy to figure out what to do. It's like, I want to do something, but I don't know what. I just have this, want to move.
Mm-hmm.
Start tracking these things and pay attention to more than just how long has it been that I've been awake and how much sleep did I get last night.
Yeah.
And try to incorporate this as part of why, I swear we're going to wrap up here. This is part of why I try to emphasize for people, study after study after study, average person spends in an 8-hour workday of intellectual labor about 2.5 of that time, 2.5 hours of the 8 hours engaged in the intellectual labor. What do you think they're doing the rest of the time? And
Would it be resting cognitively?
Resting and recovering.
Yeah.
If I were to ask Baston Cider or pretty much any person who says to me, I have such a hard time going to sleep at night because I'm tired, but my mind is racing and I just do these things, blah, blah, blah. Anybody who says that, if I ask in an average 8-hour workday, how much of that time do you spend engaged in actual work?
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of the time, they're going to say something like, I don't know, probably only like 6.5 hours. I know I need to do more.
Yeah.
Doing way more, still feeling guilty about not doing even more than they are, and giving less than zero thought. I know that's impossible. less than zero thought to what are the other things that the other people are doing during the time in which they're continuing to work.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some of that stuff is the stuff that you end up doing after 10 p.m. And you're looking and saying, why do all these other people go to sleep so early? Because they have fun during the day.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, revenge bedtime procrastination. Get it. It's a thing, for sure. Very evocative. And the solution is not to cut yourself off from doing those enjoyable things at night and just go to sleep anyway. It doesn't work. That's why people who talk about that never say, here's the solution. They just say,
Yeah.
here's a description of what I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
The solution is you do those things earlier in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're saying that you can't fit it in, which happens, then there's other questions to be looking at. Because whether you can fit it in or not, your body and your brain need it in order to be able to sleep the way that you want it. There's no third option. There's no magic way. Just like I love that people will be like, hate, love, find hilarious that people are like, I just need to want it more and then I'll do it. As though there's no such thing as like the law of conservation of energy.
Oh.
That if I just think differently, if I have a different idea, if I really make myself try and fall asleep earlier, then it will. There are physical and biological processes. I certainly understand that we don't all have all the easiest options, and sometimes we have to deal with stuff that it makes it so we can't do those things earlier in the day. But there isn't a magic solution to not being able to do that stuff earlier in the day, but also then going to sleep easily and early
Mm-hmm.
later on. The closest thing to a magic option like that is medication,
Mm-hmm.
which is useful and valid. There's nothing wrong with that. Just the danger there is starting to think, well, I don't need to worry about changing the way that my life is so that I can enjoy any aspect of it because I have medicine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can work all day long and never do the things that are fun for me and still go to bed on time. So why would I try to change anything?
Yeah.
This is why ADHD medication in particular sometimes leads to things getting worse for people, because it just papers over some problems, helps you to be able to do things
Mm-hmm.
that mean that you don't have to find a different solution,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't to say that it's a crux or a band-aid. I take ADHD meds. It's just because you can survive a thing, just because you can get through your day, doesn't mean that it's not worth trying to see if you can make it more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went way long.
That's a good note to end on. We've gone way over time. Thank you both.
All right. Yeah. I don't
Thank you for being with us in the chat.
Party.
Yeah, thank you everyone in the chat.
Yeah. Thank you for the engagement. It was lovely.
All right.
We'll be here.
And thank you to Marie and Brandon.
Same bad time, same bad channel. Bye all.
Bye.